When we think of classic arcade racing games from the 1980s, we often think about Outrun or even Chase HQ. Prior to these, Buggy Boy, or Speed Buggy as it's known in North America, came first in 1985 and was developed by Tatsumi. It was known for having one of the best arcade cabinets at the time, which was a cockpit cabinet which came with a panoramic free-screen display which slightly surrounded you to give the player that more immersive racing experience. The game is not only extremely detailed and very colourful, but a real fun racer to play. It might be a fairly old game, but this one in particular has held up extremely well compared to racers that even came after Buggy Boy. The game is fairly simple. We can choose from several different race courses. The aim is to finish in the shortest possible time. Each race contains 5 legs, where the course gradually gets more tricky to race. The courses are full of flags and gates which offers points. We also have obstacles and can even have our buggy jump over logs. Like I was saying, for its time, which was 1985, this was a fairly advanced and very innovative racing game. It is also a very challenging game too, especially trying to make it across narrow bridges. Each course in the original arcade game looks great still. From snowy courses to desert courses and pure off-road challenges, we can even ride sideways in this game, and going under tunnels looks truly amazing. It is presented in an almost cartoon style, and it looks really great for it too. Kind of like it's not taking itself too seriously, but seriously at the same time. So by popular request and through going through your requests, we have finally arrived at going through each home conversion of this amazing racer and establishing which conversion was the best one next to the arcade game. Let's just say that this is no Chase HQ in terms of a great racer for the ZX Spectrum. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was as pitiful as the C64's version of Chase HQ though. I will be honest, from time to time, I will play particular versions of games for this series, which I seriously cannot wait to finish playing. This is definitely one of them. Where do I start with this monstrosity? There are several things wrong with Buggy Boy by Elite releasing in 1988 for the ZX Spectrum. Now, as terrible as this sounds, this is running the 128K Spectrum version, which technically should be fairly good. But it really isn't. The track is really difficult to see, as instead of clear lines of track which divides the track and outer track, all we get here is dashes, which looks more messy and confusing to know where we're going. Of course, the biggest disaster is the size of the buggy itself. I mean, really, what were they actually thinking? Combined with objects in the road such as rocks and a track you can't make much sense of, these 3 problems alone are enough to drive a man insane. Literally, the colours used are shocking, and this version doesn't even perform too great in terms of speed. It truly is horrendous. If I found this awful to play here in 2025, I am not sure what people in 1988 would have made of it. The ZX Spectrum was fully capable of powering fairly decent racers. Like I mentioned before, Chase HQ on the Spectrum was way up there as one of the best racers around for 8-bit computers at the time. Am I going to ever play this version again then? No. I would rather go and attempt to learn assembly language to create something better than this, even if it took me years to do so. Elite Systems released the Amstrad CPC conversion back in 1987. Honestly, considering many Amstrad games tend to be very sluggish and suffer from immense frame drops within arcade conversions I've tested in this arcade port series, I was actually really surprised to see how well this version of Buggy Boy actually performed. Sure, it comes in a smaller box ratio, and there is no attempt to make it wide either, but we can see it looks like it's made a really good attempt to convert a fairly complex arcade game for a mere 8-bit microcomputer. It's easy enough to control. Joystick up accelerates, joystick down decelerates, and forward button raises the gear to high or low. It performs superb. It picks up a good pace of speed with ease here. Sure, in terms of certain parts of the courses, the narrow bridges aren't narrow at all here, but just the same size as the roads we are actually racing on. The course selection screen was a little bland, but surprised me again when pressing fire button to select a course. We even had the arcade 8-bit rendition with stars rotating around the image playing that little tune. In terms of how the buggy is presented, we are slightly looking down from a higher point of view here, but it does the job well. Speed and depth perception is also here. It looks much like you are racing. Objects on the side of the roads are missing here, and the distant image of mountains are a little blocky too. Jumping over logs looks really good, and there is even a separate sprite used here for going on two wheels. This is a very good conversion, and I would imagine it was one of the best arcade conversions for the CPC. The Commodore 64 also got a very good version and definitely above average for a C64 racing game. In Commodore 64 fashion, the colours are dull in comparison to the Amstrad's conversion, but this version was just a tad better to play. It seemed, although there were more bends in the road, and those narrow bridges even existed here, which offers that little more challenge inside of the game. We also got a full gameplay screen with this 1987 Elite release. Again, although not arcade perfection in terms of how it looks, it certainly does play well. The buggy seems much more flexible when turning and making jumps, just seems a little more movable with this version. Some might argue that it looks way too blocky compared to the Amstrad's version, and that's very true, it does. But of course this isn't an official ranking video, it's just my humble opinions after all. The difficulty level was particularly high with this release. Some have even said it is better than the original arcades game. The 3D effect here is also really nicely done, where speed and depth perception is nicely done too. Sound effects are as likely as close to the arcades game as they can get for an 8-bit computer. Again, just like the CPC's version, this version for the Commodore 64 is way up there and ranks as one of the best racers for the system. It also has a very nice course selection screen where stars circle the course box when chosen. I particularly liked the 3D effect when racing under tunnels here. A really nice conversion which very likely kept kids in 1987 very happy for a little while. Now that we have arrived to the systems much more capable, nitpicking needs a little more refinement here. So we will start off with the Atari ST's conversion. Now, firstly and evidently, a major upgrade from the previous versions in this video, in terms of visuals that is. So we will start off with the sky. The arcades game features a couple of courses which are using gradient colours which represents the sky. The off-road course, for example, had a gradient colour of light blue which then merges into orange. On the ST conversion here, we have a solid orange. The shades of orange do change as we go through the course though, which is representing time changes. In looking at the buggy itself, the arcades game contains several different sprites for when turning left to right. The Atari ST version is fairly basic when turning. You don't get to see much of the sights when turning corners. We also have minimal animations too when landing after jumping off logs. The arcade game shows a little more dimension to the buggy, whereas with the ST conversion there are just a couple of sprites used to represent this. So now on with the good. Undoubtedly this is a decent ST game. It does control fairly well and operates at a steady pace, although it does appear to play at a frame rate which could be much better of course. We don't get the arcade look when choosing a course. The arcade game has each course inside of a box represented by image of it, but every home conversion receives didn't get this anyways. The tracks are well designed and narrow bridges are awkward to cross just like the original game was. We also have some objects on the sides of the roads or dirt track we are racing on. One thing with the Atari ST version that beats anything in this list is the actual sound effects when racing into flags and gates, which are actually the closest to arcades game as you will get. It's, like I say, a decent enough racer for the Atari ST and likely one of the best on the platform too, but the next version just gives it that little more. And in first place, in my opinion, the Amiga's version pretty much looks similar to the Atari ST's version, although this Amiga game is much more speedier and runs at smoother pace too. Now, there are people out there which will argue the Commodore 64 conversion is better than this, which of course is down to debate, but obviously the Amiga's version has the full arcade look. Sure, it's not presented in that widescreen look, very simply because this was produced in 1988 by Elite. It was more than likely that having a widescreen look on a 4:3 ratio monitor was going to take away much of the gameplay screen, and obviously would have been left with boring black borders. Besides, widescreen TVs didn't really make it on a full-scale commercial basis until the 90s and early 2000s. So yes, I found this version much more responsive when handling turns from left to right. The Buggy just seemed much more flexible when controlling in general compared to the Atari ST's port. Sure, the sound effects are different from the arcade's release, and it's obvious that the ST won with that battle. One thing that the ST nor the Amiga actually did was have that very high-pitched sound of the Buggy itself, so both fairly equal in that respect. Like I said, putting these 16-bit computer conversions together are almost identical, but the Amiga wins really on the basis of having that little extra oomph. And Wilson felt a little more smoother to play too. A very close call for sure with these two systems. And that's it for ranking the various home conversions of Buggy Boy or Speed Buggy today. So which version did you have growing up? Did you have that terrible, absolutely terrible monstrosity of a ZX Spectrum port? Or was you happy enough with your Atari ST or Amiga conversion? Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.